acknowledges and pays respect to the Wichita and affiliated tribes upon whose historical homeland our university is located. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Frederick Gooding Jr., aka Dr. J, and I am chair of TCU's inaugural Race and Reconciliation Initiative. Our charge, as handed down by the Chancellor and Board of Trustees, is to study TCU's relationship with slavery, racism, and the Confederacy. We have been hard at work all year long, conducting archival research and looking to stay connected and build community through town halls like these. We are pleased and proud to inform you that we plan to present the results of our first year survey report next Wednesday, the 21st of April. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as the culmination of this first year's effort. Again, by way of clarification, RRI is an academically based, historically focused initiative designed to investigate TCU and document its history. So to the extent that we receive questions outside of the scope of our charge, we will simply kindly direct them to the appropriate parties. We do indeed have the Q&A function available today, so you are more than welcome to send in questions as we listen to the panelists, and we will do our best to get to as many of the questions as possible by program's end. So today's topic, we're going to simply take a look at the report and talk about Reconciliation Day, which is upcoming next Wednesday. And our hope is that through our discussion, we will provide critical perspective and deepen our understanding that will hopefully push us forward and toward action and healing, or in other words, reconciliation. At this point, I would like to call upon the screen to join me several co-conspirators for today's session. And that would be none other than my colleague from the Office of the Provost, Dr. Karen Steele. And I would also at this point like to call forth our colleague who's on the committee and also newly installed Director of CRESS, Comparative Race and Ethnic Studies, and that would be Dr. Scott Kurashige. And also, last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to also ask for this individual to unmute his camera and microphone so we can witness at least one more time the mellifluous, the marvelous, and the magnificent Mr. Marcellus Perkins. Absolutely. $1 million smile every time, every time. So why don't we just go ahead and get right into it. Dr. Kurashige, good to see you. Good to see you, Dr. Steele, and good to see you, Mr. Perkins. Why don't we just start with the basics? Because I know we're supposed to talk about the actual report and things of that nature, but does anyone want to talk about 421? Like what they know 421 is about, and what's the hullabaloo? What should people be looking forward to with respect to next Wednesday?
I guess I'll take the first stab at it, Dr. G. So with next Wednesday, Reconciliation Day, we're looking to hand over what we've done. This collection of research, not literally blood, but blood, sweat, tears, energy that our committee has put forth and looking at the true history of TCU. We're combining it together to hand over in celebration of the public. This is not the end all be all. This isn't the, hey, everything is fixed, but more so this is time for the next step. So we've done the research, we'll continue to do the research, but this is more so to hand over to the powers that be to say that, hey, here is what we as the collective have brought together. Now we shall move forward in a way that is equitable for this TCU community. So that's what I'm looking forward towards next week during Reconciliation Day. And also the day after Reconciliation Day, which I think is the most important day.
Oh, wow. That is profound. That is profound. So wait, well, I mean, since you kind of opened that door, what do you mean by the day after? I mean, what's so special about the 22nd of April?
I mean, I think the 22nd of April and every day after that is, what do we do with the research? I mean, it's one thing to do the research, but there's more so what do we do with the information that we have. So I think that's what the important part is, because if not, then it is actually, it doesn't level up to what was expected. So what we do with that, doing the information that we have, says more of the intentions when we first started.
No, and to your point, and obviously, this is a panel piece, and Dr. Kurashige is moderating. So I'd just like to say, just for my piece about 421, I agree with Mr. Perkins wholeheartedly. As you can see on your screen, we have this save the date piece here. The website provides a little bit more contextual detail about how the day is structured. From 11 to 12, it's actually in 3 parts. It's from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. From 11 to 12 is what we call contemplation. And so you're free to join us to simply join us in a reflective mood as to how far we've come and how far we need to go. From 12 to 1 is the actual meat and potatoes as far as the program is concerned. And that's where you'll find out some of the revelations of what we discovered over the past year. And also not just the research, but also the recommendations that we shared with the Board of Trustees that were unanimously approved last Friday. And also the results as far as what we've been looking to do as far as making steps towards reconciliation. And then from 1 to 2, we're going to, so we had contemplation, commemoration, and then we'll have celebration. Now, I just want to caution the public that's listening. When we say celebration from 1 to 2, this is not to state TCU has done it and game over, everyone go home, God bless you, good night. No, what we're celebrating is this idea that we are indeed a community that's coming together to move forward together. We wish to celebrate this idea of the prospects of a new future that we can influence based upon our embracing of the past, right? So I just want to be very clear. This is not to celebrate this idea that TCU's done and we get it necessarily. We're trying to get it, right? And with more people like you involved, hopefully we'll get it and get there, right? That's the idea behind it. So I just wanted to provide that little contextual piece. I don't know if there's anything else I missed, Dr. Steele, as far as 421, what to look forward to, anything, or?
The part we haven't really said is who's going to be there. And we expect everybody on our campus is going to be there, coming, checking out, participating, listening. There's going to be a video booth where we're going to invite people to record what does reconciliation mean to you. We've already begun that process of videotaping over the last month, and we're hoping to build on that archive. So if you have things you want to share, we invite you to come and participate in the video booth. Come partake of the celebration, listen to the recommendations and the results. But students, faculty, and staff, we hope you'll all be there.
I think, as has been stated, this is not an ending, it's a milestone, right? And I think it's really important to me that this is the culmination of a nearly 2-semester-long collective effort, right? So I'm really honored to have been part of a team that has approached this subject and this initiative really with the dedication and the seriousness it deserves. And it's obviously, it's not just faculty, it's students, it's staff, it's administrators, it's alumni, it's volunteers, and it's people from all over the campus. I mean, obviously I work in comparative race and ethnic studies, so it's very close to my heart, this subject. But it also shows that this is not a subject that can be handled by any one constituency group or any one unit on campus. It really required this team effort of people putting together a lot of different types of labor, expertise, knowledge, research. So I think in many ways, this initiative is a good case study of what we can accomplish as a campus when we all dedicate ourselves to working together, when we share a common goal, and we have the buy-in from everyone up from the very top of leadership at the university to students and community members that are just as invested in our success as a campus and institution. And so I guess this is maybe a point for me as moderator to invite those of you that have done this work and have had these interactions with our colleagues to maybe tell us more about what made this possible. It's both, it's a intellectual labor, but it's also an emotional labor, right? It's a relationship building experience. So I guess I would love to hear more of your thoughts on that. Like, what are the ingredients that made this possible so far?
Well, to jump in, Scott, I really appreciate the question. You're right. A number of ingredients are necessary to take on a project like this. And I think the one word that you just said that really resonated with me was this idea of relationship, right? When Mr. Perkins and I hosted a town hall just a few weeks ago with members of the Northside community, a member of the community, Mr. Ricky Clark, said something that we've been chewing on for ever since. And Perkins, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he said something along the lines of, in order to lead the people, you need to love the people, right? Was that what he said?
Yep, he said, in order to lead the people, you have to love the people, but to love the people is to know the people.
Okay, and so I think what this enterprise has revealed to us, Scott, is this idea that there's a lot of internal, building and reconciliation that we need to do, right? I mean, even though we're a relatively small campus, say compared to say an Ohio State or University of Michigan, of which you're familiar, is relatively intimate in that respect. But at the same time, it's been a challenge in terms of being able to universally communicate and getting everybody on the same page. I mean, even just this idea that this town hall right now, I mean, we're not only just talking about, I think, important ideas, but also as part and parcel of just trying to make contact and let people know about what's going on. And so I think when we talk about relationship building, my hope would be that next year, this is, less of a, oh, I didn't hear about that, but more of a, oh, okay, yeah, I know about that, type of conversation, as far as, people now just organically starting to talk about this concept of reconciliation and trying to figure out how they fit in. But the relationship piece is absolutely key in terms of us being able to connect and understand, various perspectives, various histories, where we're coming from, so that way we can figure out the points of commonality and figure out the areas of growth that we need to tackle and take on, right? And so I want to emphasize, I think we'll probably come back to this, that in terms of building relationship, on 421, we view this as a good faith deposit in the bank of public trust. This report is not, N-O-T, going to save the world. It's not going to cure cancer. And it's definitely not going to make COVID go away overnight, right? This report is merely think of it as a white paper draft. It's a first-year survey report by which we can use as a tool to continue building those key relationships, both off campus with other members, within our larger community, and more importantly, on campus within our TCU community, whether it be faculty, staff, student, or alumni. This report is what we hopeful will be a foundational piece by which we can continue building these relationships. Because you're right, if we're not connected and don't know one another, it's going to be hard to move forward together.
Can I sort of build on what Dr. G just said? I think about this idea of what creates a community to do the work that we've done. And I do think that this is one of the great selling points, if you will, of interdisciplinary scholarship and collaboration, that we can bring together. We have a unity of focus in terms of what we need to understand. But there are many different ways of approaching the questions and even coming up with the questions. I'm thinking again about last night and Kimberly Crenshaw talking about a framework, what we can and cannot see, what we understand and don't know, we don't know. So our frameworks are really essential, but also our different kinds of disciplinary trainings and commitments that were really essential to the work of this year. it's obvious that we need someone with the kind of historical and um, a historical chops and an expertise in the African American experience, and that's why we have an ideal captain in Dr. G. And we have historians who also, you, Scott, being one of them, and we had an archive crew of undergraduate and graduate students. And I want to say a little bit about them too, because they contributed a tremendous amount, and they were not easily visible to those on the outside, and how we were able to make our way through a lot of archival research. And then with Dr. Greensword, our Race and Reconciliation Initiative postdoc, doing the oral history, which is going to build more knowledge, because in some ways our archive, it was missing a lot of information, and we're having to create a new archive to be able to know the stories, especially the stories of the 20th and the 21st century at TCU. But I did want to say, give a shout out to our archive team, Brianna Salas, who's a PhD student in history, and then 3 undergraduates, one of whom graduated and still continued to work for us. That's Mary Taylor Williams, Katie Consonaire, and Lauren Laffin. They were tremendously committed, talented, resourceful. They were the great detectives. They found incredible information, and it was a great joy to meet with them weekly and hear their discoveries, and to track down information from the task forces that had a sense of, we know this, but we need to find more information, and they doggedly pursued that. But it wasn't just historians who were doing this work. We also had people who collaborated with us, and I think about Dan Jan's just tremendously beautiful, collaboratively produced art installation that is outside next to the founder's statue. What a tremendous project that shows you that the kind of work that we're doing requires many different parts of ourselves, and the role of art and the humanities to this work is central. It's not the only part, but we might often think that certain disciplines don't have the expertise to do this work. And we can see with Dan Jan's classes accomplishments how much so many disciplines, so many different individuals and trainings contribute to the work that we did this year, and that we hope we can build on in the future.
Thank you for that. As we know, archives are a record of the past, but they're not a neutral record, right? What's in the official archive reflects what people in the past thought was important to document and retain. And so it's been very enlightening for me, as someone who just joined TCU last year, to learn about this past, see the research that the team has done, and to learn about the founders and the context in which the school was created. But at the same time, I think this process has also told us what the archives maybe are missing, right? Who's been marginalized, or who's been silenced, or who's had their histories distorted by the past. And so it's also given us that sense of a challenge to understand some of the nuances, some of the parts of history that have fallen through the cracks. And maybe let's, in the time we have, let's start getting to some of those findings. I feel like we're a group of movie critics who've all seen the movie that hasn't been released yet. But the audience out there, while we're not going to do all the spoilers, we want to give at least some highlights of what's coming. So who would like to start by sharing some of the key findings that you find in this report?
I can start and share that one of the pieces that we were able to absolutely nail down was that while there's some controversy, I think, on how we perceive the Clark brothers, particularly with their statute right across university, we can nail down a couple things. One is that is not a Confederate statute, okay? We know that Confederate statutes were built to honor the Confederacy and typically have insignia expressly, explicitly connecting the individuals to the Confederacy, as part of this lost cause, right? This idea that some individuals wanted to look at the Civil War from the view most sympathetic of the Confederacy, right? This idea that, these poor Southerners were simply trying to maintain their way of life. And so their way of life their pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness just happened to include the imprisonment, torture, and enslavement and exploitation of other people, right? It's just absolutely mind-boggling, but that's what it was. And I think that for anyone to make the argument that the Civil War was not about enslavement, and that enslavement was not a key fundamental factor is absolutely, I'm going to look at the camera, ludicrous, right? Ludicrous, right? I just want to make that clear, right? And so that's another conversation we can have if you want. But the fact of the matter is that that's what it was. But Scott, in answer to your question, what we do know is that while it's not a Confederate statute per se, the two individuals of who we have a statute of, Addison and Randolph Clark, they absolutely 100% have Confederate ties. Addison Clark absolutely enrolled, like sign me up, I'm here, like enrolled, right? He rose to a rank of officer. We have his exact designation in the report. And so that will be coming out in the 21st, of course. And his brother, Randolph Clark, joined him at a point later in the war, right? And so he didn't necessarily officially enroll, but he did join him. So if you look in the archives, there's a memoir called Reminiscences, and they explain it like this idea that while not conscripted, they were, shall we say, geographically conflicted, right? This idea that they personally did not see themselves as advocating for enslavement necessarily, but more as defending their homeland, right? And the idea that if they did not take up arms, there was concern that individuals would, take them up for them, right? This idea if all your neighbors on either side are, taking up arms, and here you are, and you say I abstain, there's this, shall we say, peer pressure for you to get involved. That being said, we're still talking about a state that seceded from the Union, and given the larger context of the Confederacy, it's not a perfect excuse, right? It's not a perfect justification, but that is the reason that they give, according to their memoir. So I think what it does, Scott, is it helps us clarify a bit the background by which we now can foreground how we want to tell the story moving forward as far as the legacy. So while it would be technically inaccurate to say that's Confederate statute, the idea is that they have Confederate ties. And so what does that mean for us, right? Because we obviously are, all of us here are benefiting in some way from this idea of TCU as an institution. We wouldn't be in the space if it wasn't for this idea of TCU. And so they helped to found that. And it was forward thinking, if you want to call it that, back then, because it was one of the few co-ed institutions west of the Mississippi. But that being said, people always, as a historian, Scott, I'm sure you're familiar, people always whip out these, anachronistic arguments to you, right? This idea, well, things were different back then, right? And, well, we're, so in other words, shouldn't we refrain from being so harsh, judging people in hindsight? And I think, there's some validity to that, this idea that, we can't judge people on how efficient they were in communication if they didn't have cell phones or internet, right? I understand that in a general sense, but where I personally get off the bus, and I don't know what Mr. Perkins or Dr. Still has to say, but where I personally get off the bus is this idea that still rape. Murder was still murder. So just like exploiting somebody every day of their life in chains, just like that's wrong today, we call that enslavement. I think it was wrong back then. And I think people knew that. And I think if you go to the libraries and take your time to read many of these books, you'll see how so many individuals had difficulty justifying the institution of slavery, the peculiar institution. And I think that's one of the reasons why the rationales kept changing and morphing over the years, whether it be using the Bible or science, eugenics, the black brain is smaller, that's the reason why they're built to be enslaved. Just all these rationales, the reason why they kept shifting and changing was because I think people always knew in their hearts that you're exploiting another human being. You're torturing another human being. It's basic, right? And I'm not trying to get off topic, but I'm starting to get warmed up here. Derek Chauvin. What's there to talk about? There's a knee on somebody's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I don't care what color you are, what country you're from. It's basic. It's wrong, right? I'm looking at the camera. It's wrong. It's just that basic. It's just that simple. There's nothing to debate. Oh, well, he had something in the system. He was handcuffed. He was unarmed. He was laying down prostrate on his stomach. It's basic. I'm not going to argue with you. You can argue with yourself. So I say that to say that when we talk about, oh, well, this idea that we weren't directly connected, the fact of the matter is that we still have to interrogate how TCU was founded in an era where, these ideas that more of us share now were not commonplace. And what does that mean for the beginning of an institution that is designed to educate all, but yet perhaps was not necessarily open to all, at least for the first part of its history.
And I think we also have research that shows that Addison and Randolph came from a family that did have a connection to slavery as well, right? Their father, not at maybe the level of some of the largest plantation holders in the South, but did have a record of purchasing, enslaved persons, right, and holding persons in slavery. So there'll be a number of things that I think will be really eye-opening, I think, for our community.
Before you ask your next question,
Yep.
You're absolutely correct. And I just wanted to say for the record that is documented and will be available for people to read about in terms of the connection their father, Joseph A. Clark, had with enslavement. While we did not find evidence that Addison and Randolph, the founders, owned enslaved, it could be true. We just didn't find evidence of it. We did find evidence that their father did at some point in time did. And like you said, it was, we found evidence of at least 3 different instances. And so while it's not the quote unquote plantation model, in terms of, what have you, it's still enslavement.
And I also wanted to give everyone a chance to talk about, because this report, whereas some other universities have taken this on and devoted their whole year just to the question of the era of enslavement, this initiative has gone into the issue of segregation and integration, really the long struggle for integration, which some people could say was very, very belated. So do you want to give us any the findings that you think are important to know about that history of segregation and integration in the 20th century?
Can I just say that, just to build again on something that was said before, that one of the, I think, strategies of this triangulation, picking certain points in time, we've left out the extent of Jim Crow, which would be a great place to do a more deep dive. But one of the things you can really see, and I will share a little bit about the era of segregation in a moment, but one of the things that I think is really essential and really comes clear in the report is that the founders ties their cultural commitment to the meaning of the Confederacy, which they held on to well after the war, really informs the culture of TCU in the middle of the 20th century. And it shapes the policies and the practices and the attitudes about desegregation. TCU was very slow, even among universities in the South, even among universities in Texas, to desegregate. We know all of those. Those are not surprising findings. Some of the interesting parts are the precursor, or the places in which TCU's attempts to respond in a Christian way towards African Americans who were seeking an education was to really reinforce segregation. So the first evidence of any Black person who took classes at TCU happened as early as the 40s in World War II. And when TCU was providing background training for naval and marine officers for airplane pilots. And then in the 50s, we provided, we had a few faculty members in the College of Education who went to an elementary school off campus to provide training and college educated, to give college coursework for African American educators, public school educators who could not complete their degrees in North Texas otherwise. Those were the precursors. And then of course there was Bright and Harris College, which were these slow places where TCU was incrementally providing modest opportunities while still resisting the great challenge to fully transform a university to be a multicultural university by fully integrating its undergraduate population, which didn't happen until 1964.
Anyone else like to add thoughts on the issue of integration and some of what we've captured about some of those early experiences of African Americans at TCU?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to jump in. When we were doing some of the classroom visits, Dr. G and I, one of the things that I would always start with is, what are the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, right? And I would ask the students, like, are you all familiar with Palco as a building name? Are you familiar with Kelly? Are you familiar with Schollmeyer? You know, of course, students will raise their hands, you know, even professors, like, yeah, I'm familiar with these names. These names, you know, submitted a lot of money to erect and build buildings for our learning, for resources, for facilities. So of course they have a rightful place on campus. But then I would ask, is anyone familiar with the name Charlie Thorpe? And no one would raise their hand, right? And I would go on to explain that, you know, Charlie Thorpe was an enslaved African-American who, at the founding of TCU, helped build and erect TCU, right? And in its earlier stages. Thorpe, his last name, obviously has connections to the original location of TCU in Thorpe Springs, Texas. But why isn't that, you know, something that is known, right? Even though he didn't submit millions of dollars to erect a new athletic facility, in the building of the original building, in the facilitating or the protection of the building, or being someone who did everything but teach, is an important role, and especially in the early stages of any type of institution, doing the small details. So going into that type of conversation, and I'm engaging with the students, my follow-up question is, you know, when we don't tell everyone's story, or we leave out or we exclude stories, it creates a pattern of leaving out certain parts of our history. And we're able to tell a certain story about ourselves that paints us in a light that we are a certain way, right? Now, through our research, we weren't able to track down other enslaved persons name by names who also helped alongside Charlie Thorpe. But when we're able to tell the story of Charlie Thorpe, there are people who are connected to him whose stories may not be able to be told. So by telling his story indirectly, we also bring to light others who may have been forgotten along the way.
Thank you for that. And we also know that even when there were little or no students of color, that there were a lot of people doing work that made it possible, right, for the institution to function as well. So I think that's an important history. I'm going to invite the attendees to put questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. So please start putting in theirs. I think I should be able to see them, right? I don't see any right now. So please go ahead and ask your questions. Here's one. Is there a plan to memorialize Charlie Thorpe on campus? And is that announcement coming on April 21st?
So the short answer is, well, you have to show up to find out, right? But here's the deal. If the answer is no, and I guess, again, you'll have to find out for sure on the 21st, but if the answer is no, maybe it's not no, maybe it's not yet, right? And this idea that this anonymous attendee might, you know, be able to join forces with us in terms of, you know, making this a point of, you know, of advocacy, you know, this idea that, you know, again, we really want to make the we as inclusive as possible, as far as what is it that we want. And so, we tried to do our best to find pieces of information that, you know, that should be brought to light. And then now that, you know, they're brought to light and we start to, you know, this information, the question is, we have to make a determination as to what we want to do with this information. And so to the extent that we decide that, no, this is important, this needs to be included in the story that we tell. I mean, Mr. Perkins, I think, makes a compelling point. I mean, how do you get this ship off the ground? You know, and his labor apparently was indispensable. And, you know, in helping to erect the building that housed, you know, TCU in its early stages. And so, I mean, because actually TCU, you know, the founders actually fled Fort Worth, right? It was called Hell's Half Acre. It was apparently the story being that it was a place where they felt was just going to be in conflict with their Christian values. So by seeking refuge, to Thorpe Spring, I think it's not without irony that the hands of a Black man directly contributed to them having a citadel, a safe haven, with which they were able to grow this institution. So to the extent that we decide this is important, absolutely, then we can have that conversation and negotiate and discuss and determine the best way to tell that story moving forward. So I think on one level, while it might be unsatisfactory for some, this idea that we couldn't solve everything in this first year, for me, if anything, I'm invigorated and I'm excited by what I would call the art of the possible, right? This idea that we've only just begun in so many ways to have this conversation. Reconciliation will not happen overnight. And so long as we all know and agree that it will be a process, and this idea that we're dedicated and we're committed to making the consistent daily deposits, then I think it makes for a much more exciting conversation as to what can and what should be.
That's a good segue to our next question, which is about the reconciliation process and what it means and who it's open to. So if we attended TCU and are a person of color and we left on bad terms from the institution, are we included in the reconciliation process? I would say definitely yes. If we're going to create an inclusive campus, we have to confront the legacy of exclusion and marginalization. But I want to throw this to the panel. How do we make sure that people who felt excluded feel included in this reconciliation process?
I believe we try our best to tell the stories as best we can with information that is provided. It's a difficult process. It won't be always done to the best of our abilities, but it is being done to the best of our abilities in a lot of different ways. So we just make that attempt by telling the stories best we can.
And I would say being open to learning new things that may change fundamentally what we think we know. I think that we, in any given time, we think we know, and Scott, this is coming back to this question about sometimes the materials that we have are incomplete. And I think that this is a real opportunity for us to engage with our communities, and particularly our communities of color, in a more sustained and intentional way, to be seeking their stories. I feel like there's a lot that we could be learning about who we are that we haven't always been open to hearing. And this is another place where we have to revisit how we tell our story and what we think we know about who we are.
And I think it's a really good point, because with this being a historical, academically based enterprise, it's not a matter of us printing what we like, right? And I think that's the difficult part of this, maybe for some, that some of the parts of the history are going to be difficult to hear. They're going to be tough to swallow. They're going to be embarrassing. I mean, but at the same time, it's going to be accurate. It's going to be the truth. So, I mean, I think so long as we tell the truth, we really have nothing to fear. I mean, it's just the truth. It is what it is. And so the fundamental question is, what do we do with this truth? Because I think, to Dr. Steele's point, what we think we know today might change, based upon what we learn tomorrow, right? And I think us staying open to that, I think is so very important, as opposed to remaining fixed like a statue, or on this idea that, no, we had this one narrative and that's the narrative that we must cling to. I mean, I think that we are uniquely suited within a university context to be dynamic and to be complicated, right? And so the idea is that, the Clark brothers, did a really cool thing. They started the school that, that has all of us connected. I mean, I wouldn't have had an opportunity to get to know all of you in this screen right now were it not for this idea of TCU, right? So that's a good thing, right? But at the same time, the history is complicated, to say the least. I mean, this idea that it's either all good or all bad, I don't know if that's a helpful way to approach this larger idea that these issues are complicated, they're evolving, and to what degree that we want to take the time to parse out what that means, that's the question, right? I mean, because it's going to take a commitment to really figure out what all the detail and nuance means for us, as opposed to a simplistic, it was either good or bad, and not let's just move on, and I think that we don't want to do a disservice to the students that we're preparing to lead on, because the world that we are entrusting them to lead on is indeed dynamic, organic, ever-changing, and complicated.
Yeah, I think 421 is an important milestone for recognize the work that's been done and the effort and the progress that's been made, but it's also a time to open up to the community for constructive feedback, criticism, right? And things that still need to be done. Several questions, really just a quick one. Will the 421 event be recorded or live streamed for those who cannot be there in person?
The answer to the live stream, unfortunately, is no. And so there's a number of steps involved, but it will be recorded. And so that will be posted as soon as possible. So do check back to the website with regularity. What we'll do is I'll put the website link in the chat box shortly. So individuals who want to find out what happened in case they had a class obligation or something of that nature can absolutely tune in and find out what's going on. So the live stream piece is, maybe something that we can work towards. But for this year, you want to be there or be square.
But we want to say that for people who are not students, faculty, or staff in COVID times, they're still not permitted to be on our campus. And that's why we felt it was essential. Even if we couldn't do real time, we could provide a high quality recording of the event soon after on our site when you can watch it when it's a good time for you.
And I've put the event website in response to one question about registration and in response just in generally to all the attendees for more info there. Some challenging questions I want to get to. How can you say that TCU fully integrated in 1964 when today it is still less than 6% Black in a community that is nearly 20% Black, or when the IFC fraternities are still almost all white? Who would like to respond to that?
I will. I mean, I spoke sloppily. When I said fully integrated, what I meant is institutionally, all units of our campus admitted students without, regard to race. It's really probably a more accurate way to say non-segregation. We became a non-segregation university officially in 1964, where all undergraduates could apply, could be admitted, could be in. But the questioner is posing, I think, a really challenging one that we as a campus continually need to grapple with, and that is that we haven't effectively, we don't have an institution. If we look at our administration, our faculty, our staff, or our students, that reflects the larger community in which we sit. That's a great challenge. And if you come to 421, you'll hear some of our recommendations that are really trying to get at that problem. And it's a persistent one. It's been one since we were founded.
And also I just want to jump in and just say that unfortunately, TCU is not alone in this regard. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why we joined the Universities Studying Slavery Consortium, an international consortium of over 60 universities that are taking the pains to find out what the full history is and how to go about telling that truth. And so, all I'm saying is that I think the larger picture for me is that we live in a white-dominated patriarchal society. So whether I go to TCU, GCU, or VCU, many of these issues are going to be quite consistent. And so I think, if anything, we can flip it as a challenge and say, if we truly wish to lead on, we can, make the necessary investments in terms of time, money, and energy to study our past, so that way we can figure out how best to influence our future legacy.
And there are questions about what will the RRI be doing about, contemporary campus culture, Greek life, residential life. And I know, this first year, as part of a multi-year process, we had to focus in large measure because of our charge and because of our attempt to establish the historical foundations
Right.
on that 19th century origins and then those 20th century histories of segregation and integration. But so we won't be able to address every aspect this year. But these are the kind of things that we want members of the community to come out and say, these are the things that we want to see in year 2, year 3, year 4, and we want to be prioritized, right?
No, I agree with you, Scott. And the thing is, remember, given the fact that we are an academically focused, historically based enterprise initiative, that gives us a certain, perspective and aim in terms of how we go about the business of reconciliation. But if anything, what I want this to do is remind us all within the community that reconciliation is not just for Team RRI to do and then update the rest of the campus community about. Reconciliation is for us all. We already have existing, vehicles in place. There are already good people doing a lot of good work already in place, and that's one of the pieces that Mr. Perkins can highlight about in terms of the podcast. One of the ways in which we've been trying to highlight good people doing good work. But I just want to rewind and just emphasize and underscore my point that if we already have certain mechanisms in place, the question is, how do we better operate those mechanisms? How do we better, mobilize, the structures that are already designed to address some of these pieces that are perhaps defunct, derelict, underfunded, right? So just from a structural standpoint, the idea is maybe we don't have to start all over from scratch and then put all this inordinate pressure on the latest new initiative to do everything. If anything, RRI is working in concert with existing institutions on campus, whether it be, you fill in the blank. I'm not going to name any, but the bottom line is this includes you and your department, you listening right now. This includes you, right? And this idea that, oh, but I only study this or I only teach that, that is what I would call, excuse my French, fiddlesticks and poppycock, right? And so I don't want to segment the work only to RRI. Now, to the extent, to answer your question, that RRI is interested in expanding its focus and its research, absolutely. We wish to open up more horizontal windows by which we can include additional perspectives, because this first year, the primary focus was on Black Americans, right? Because, how can you tell the story of slavery, racism, and Confederacy without invoking African Americans? It's impossible. So the idea is that was the primary focus, but it's not the exclusive focus. And so that necessarily, additional perspectives must be included and investigated, but also, I think more people on campus, whether staff, faculty, student, alumni, also need to feel liberated in joining in on this conversation, because it is not the exclusive province of only Team RRI. This is something that concerns us all. Ms. Perkins, what were you about to say about the podcast, though, in terms of what we're trying to do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you were saying, there are already people on campus that were doing the work of reconciliation. The car was already built, the direction was already set. In many ways, RI could have been seen as premium gas. Like, we're just trying to help us get there a little bit more efficiently. With this idea with the podcast, we noticed that, everyone doesn't want to sit through a town hall. That's just the facts. A lot of students don't want to sit through, even myself. I love RI, but, town halls can kind of get mundane, repeated, a little boring at times. So how can we change that? And that was with the idea with the podcast. How do we have organic conversations with people who are already doing the work of reconciliation? So that just allows us to highlight who we consider the champions, people that do the work day in and day out. Dr. Boyd, Dr. Gordon, I know you're out there, Dr. Gordon. It's just kind of highlighting that there are people out there who are doing the work. So if you're a listener on TCU's campus, you say like, wow, I didn't know that Dr. Boyd is working with engagement with Fort Worth community. How can I be a part of that? Or I didn't know that Miss Aisha has this initiative coming up. How can I be a part of that? So that's kind of our way to amplify some of the voices that are already helping us, or we're working alongside of this work of reconciliation and healing. So that's what the idea behind the podcast is, just kind of highlighting and amplifying voices that need to be heard on campus.
It looks like we have one more question and a couple more minutes to address it. How, if at all, do we, and I think that we refers to TCU, not just the RRI, continue to interact with / recognize the descendants of the Clark family now and in the future?
That's a very good question in the sense that I don't have the answer right now, right? And so I think what we want to do is do more research as to what the Clark family really was about, because there are some gaps in the first year survey report that we're going to put out. But I think what we're putting out on Wednesday, the 21st of April, will be enough to get us started with, right? It will definitely whet the appetite in terms of, okay, now we're starting to shape the contours of this this sandbox, so to speak, right? And so now we're starting to see where we want to dig a little bit further. So I think that relationship, as far as how we interact and recognize the descendants, is going to be based upon what it is that we find. Because now we know a little bit more than what we did maybe say a year ago. Well, it was known, it was available in archives, but this idea that us trying to put it in a format that's a bit more accessible, right? And again, as we mentioned earlier with Dr. Greensford and the Oral History Project, we really want to document the stories to find out, well, what has been the extenuating legacy, right? Even after the Clark brothers set the school in motion, to what degree did TCU truly live up to its ideals, right? Live up to, its Latin wording on the seal, right? As far as providing a true high quality education to all. So I think that the more that we know in terms of the facts, in terms of the history, in terms of the facts, in terms of the history, in terms of the facts, and in terms of the history, that will help set that foundation in terms of how we negotiate that relationship going forward, right? So I think the long answer that may not be as popular is that time will tell, right? And it's going to take a bit more time before I make a decision, or a recommendation. I think we've only just got started in terms of figuring out what we need to know to make the best informed decision.
Can I just add that it's a real opportunity? What we've learned, Dr. G and I have learned in visiting with so many of our university studying slavery partners, is that founders and the descendants of the founders of institutions, especially when those founders had a very complicated legacy, one that could be very forward thinking in terms of education, and really regrettable and worse in terms of thinking about race. And I think about Furman as one example of a university where the descendant really took a leading role in the work of reconciliation, was really invested in the full story of her ancestors, and then thinking through what does that mean for her family, and for the university that her family had been so invested and was continuing to be so invested in. I don't know how TCU has a relationship with the descendants of the Clark family, but I would hope that if they're listening, that they would want to join in this enterprise and share what they know, so we can build on what we've learned this year. But that they can also play a really important role in modeling what it is to do this important work, and to sort of change sometimes what we say we think we know about our family, about our ancestors, and about our institution.
This has been a short but a very illuminating conversation, and we're going to invite everybody to join us in the conversation and the process April 21st and beyond. And I'm going to turn it back to the panelists for just final words to give the audience about information or upcoming plans in the last 2 minutes that we have.
I'll go last.
All right, well, I guess that pushes me out to the front. I would encourage everyone to stay engaged. As I said earlier, the most important part is 422, what happens the day after. And, RRI as a team, as individuals, we return back to our individual pockets of campus, but these conversations, the things that we've learned, go with us. So the hope is that these conversations live on even after the research is over, that you take even a bit of what you read in the report, even a bit of what you've taken from some of the town halls, and you share it. because to have information and not share it is to do a disservice to all included. So again, the question is, what is a question that we ask about ourselves in regarding to community? We're willing to be honest about who we were as an institution. We can be honest about the direction in which we want to go. So I would invite you all to 421 next week, Reconciliation Day, but also to check with the website periodically, check out the podcast. And if you are interested in volunteering for 421, there are volunteer opportunities available for those that want to get in on the action. Just please submit an email to rri@tcu.edu. Again, our email is rri@tcu.edu. There you can have more instructions on what to expect. Then I'll turn it over to either Dr. Steele or Dr. G.
I don't have much to say, except we look forward to seeing you. And we want you to know that it's not just about listening. We really want to hear your voices. We especially welcome your thoughts, and come to campus, come ready to say, what does reconciliation mean to you?
And in closing, I simply would just like to remind us all that we must stay open to the art of the possible. This magnificence that you see on your screen is only the product of TCU professors who believe and TCU students who believe in the art of the possible. This is what Mr. Perkins referred to in terms of his, Professor Danjian in her art class, being able to remind us that we need to add color to our canvas plane. And so if you haven't already, if you go to the Clark Brothers statue, you will find this beautiful installation outside, reminding us that we are indeed connected in a number of ways, whether it be arts and academics and activism. We need to be thinking about how to incorporate all these aspects of our humanity as we look forward to moving forward. And also inside the library as well, you can see various aspects of this exhibit in the breezeways, particularly connecting Reese Jones Hall and the library, as put up by Dr. Greensword. And we're very thankful to Dean Tracy Hull for making the library a space of connectivity and openness so that we can continue to tell this story. Because I think in closing, I'm very appreciative to Dr. Scott Kurashige serving as our moderator, and Dr. Steele and Mr. Perkins for serving on our panel today, because we just simply want to let you know that when it comes to this report, it's not the end all be all. Again, I just want to be very clear about our expectations for what this will do. So the report itself won't necessarily change the world, but I think we might be able to use the report to change the world in which we share, right? So while I do not promise what will come about as a result of Reconciliation Day and our efforts thus far, I do pledge to you that we are doing the best we can with what we have. Thank you.